I must begin by thanking the Institute of Objective Studies to invite me for this talk. Amitabh has already preceded me and given you a lot of information about the budget, which probably is more relevant than what I'm going to speak. So I'm more of a macroeconomist. So I look at the budget first from the macro perspective and then come down to the specifics. Because if the macro is not right, your micro will also not work. So we need to understand both the macro and the micro. So the first slide, please. Okay. So we need to look at what is the framework within which the budget was presented. It's presented in the context of the post-election results, where BJP did not get a majority. It's a coalition government that has come in. And therefore, it was expected that the BJP would change its strategy. What it had been adopting, it would change the strategy so that those who are disaffected, they can be brought back to the BJP fold. And it was said, if you look at the pre-election and post-election survey of the CSDS, Niti Together surveys, then you find unemployment and things like that, price rise, were very important factors in that. So it was expected that there'd be a pro-poor basis for the budget. But the corporate sector was quite worried because the corporate sector sees pro-poor people policies as anti-business. So therefore, the corporate sector was a bit worried about this. It was also expected that, as Amitabh rightly said, Andhra Pradesh and Bihar are the two important coalition partners of this government, and therefore they were demanding their pound of flesh for the support. So it was expected that they would be given a large package. Special status was not going to be there. It was clear. They didn't get the ministries, the big ministries that they may have wanted, but it was expected that they will get a large sum of money from the budget. So that was an important thing also. Now, given that they had to be given funds, given that the poor had to be given, the corporate sector was worried that the taxes will go up, that they will have to pay a lot more taxes. So, and why they would have to pay? Because bulk of our taxes are paid by the organized sector. The corporate sector being the large part of the organized sector. So GST comes from the organized sector, income tax comes from the organized sector, the corporate tax comes from the organized sector. So bulk of your taxes are coming from the organized sector, not the unorganized sector. So that's the reason why they thought that they would actually have to pay whatever additional taxes are required. So next slide, please. So the question is, how do we know whether what they're doing in this budget is different from the past? Because it was expected that something different would be done. And here we have the interim budget, which was presented on 1st February 2024 to compare with, because that interim budget is a pre-election budget, and now we have the post-election budget. So we can compare the two, and we can see whether something big has been changed. Now, quite clearly, the overall size should have increased. If you want to do something extra, you should spend more. You should spend on the schemes that are there for the poor, for the states and so on. Now, the increase is only 1%. From 47.66 lakh crores to 48.2 lakh crores. So there's no big increase in the size of the budget. So you don't have that much space to give a lot more to the poor and to the states and so on. So what else could you have done? You could have reprioritized, whatever were the earlier schemes for which you were giving money and what you want to give, you have to reprioritize them. If you're not increasing the total size of the budget, then some internal reprioritization becomes necessary. But you don't see that also. The kind of expenditures that are there are not vastly different between the two. So there's no reprioritization. There's no big change in the overall size of the budget. So therefore, what do we need to do? Because there's a big show that is made that we are giving 1.52 lakh crore to the agriculture sector. We are creating 1 crore, internships. We'll have apprenticeships. We'll do something for the small scale sector and so on. So a big show is there. So how do you do that? You have the camouflage. What is the camouflage? You announce a lot of things, but you don't allot funds for that. That's the standard technique. So since the 2005 budget, I've been arguing, हाथी के दांत दिखाने के और खाने के और. You make a lot of pretense that you're doing this, you're going to do that, for every section. So part A of the budget speech always says we are doing this for women, for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, marginalized sections, for Northeast, everything is there. But then when you look at allocations, it's not there. And that's why what you find is that in spite of 75 years of independence, all the problems persist, whether it be poverty, whether it be unemployment, whether it be other problems, they're persisting because you're not allotting funds, appropriate funds for that, like the quality of education, health, everything that we've seen where there's a problem. So how do we camouflage our intentions? First thing is you announce 5-year programs, so they look big. So you say 1 crore in 5 years. So it looks big that you're going to do something very big, right? So you announce 5-year programs. You're not saying what is the allocation now in this budget, because that will be 1/5 or maybe even less than 1/5 because it's just starting. The program is starting. You may not even give 1/5 of that. So you have to break that down. And then if you look at this 1 crore youth over 5 years, the only thing I could find was 10,000 crores. The amount mentioned was 2 lakh crores would be spent on employment generation. But on this particular scheme, there's only 10,000 crores that is allotted. So it's not as if a huge sum of money is being announced for this. Then you announce schemes where you don't have to give funds from the budget because you depend on loans. So this Amravati scheme of 15,000 crores is going to be all loans from multilateral agencies. So it doesn't have to be in the budget. Many other schemes also, like infrastructure schemes, also depend a lot on borrowing. So they don't have to be given that much fund from the budget state because you can borrow from various agencies and fund those. So those are also not there. But you can say that I'm going to do this, so much infrastructure creation in Bihar, in Andhra Pradesh, etc. Now, when you say infrastructure projects, you don't have to give money today because that may take, say, the bridge over the Ganga in Bihar will take many years to construct. You will only give a token amount of money now, and the rest of the money will come later. Many of the schemes of Bihar are old schemes which are now going to be revived. The scheme for this irrigation project in Andhra is an old scheme which is now going to be revived. It'll take time. By the time you plan, by the time you spend the money. So you don't have to give too much money now for these schemes. So this is the other thing that is always done, that you announce 5-year schemes and you also depend on loans. Now, so say the Andhra Pradesh and the Bihar schemes. If you're going to give a lot more money to these, then the transfers to the states, which is listed in the budget, that should go up substantially. But is that going up substantially? Because you can't cut from the other states. You have to give more here, so it should go up. So let's see, in 2022-23, under this head, we allotted 2.73 lakh crores. Okay. In 23-24, this was increased to 3.25 lakh crores. So a substantial step up. But this is the standard technique that you announce a lot, but you don't spend it, which is what Professor Kundu was also mentioning, that in education sector, in the what was allotted to the Muslims, you announce big, but you don't spend it. So what was spent was 2.74 lakh crores, which is exactly the same as the previous year. So even though you've announced a big jump, but you're not allotting the funds. Okay. So the amount of expenditure is the same as the previous year. There's no increase. Now, next, what do? 24-25, you again announce a big jump of 3.23 lakh crores. But this is less than what was allotted in 23-24. So in terms of allotment, you're not increasing. From the expenditure, you are increasing. But there's no guarantee that you spend that kind of fund. So therefore, in other words, what I find is that this idea that Andhra Pradesh and Bihar are going to get a very big package, I don't see that happening. And that's where I feel even the opposition has got taken in. So it's a comedy, tragedy of errors, that Andhra and Bihar think they're going to get a lot more. The opposition parties think they're being, marginalized because these are going to get a lot more, but actually nothing like that will happen. So therefore, this is basically a political gimmick as far as I can see. And Andhra and Bihar cannot protest, because if they begin to protest, they're not getting enough, then mud will be on their face. So therefore, they cannot protest. The center will claim that we are giving a lot more funds, we are announcing these schemes, etc. So I think it's all a play, this business of things. So you can see from the transfer to the states that that is not the case. So what is the technique to make the tall claims? There are 3-4 things that are done. Expenditures to key heads are increased just to cover inflation. That's one technique. So you're not allotting more in terms of real funds, because it's just covering inflation. That's one. And in this case, I'll mention agriculture and allied activities, which was considered to be a very big allotment of 1.52 lakh crores. But this just covers inflation. So it's not as if something very extraordinary is being done for agriculture. Okay. Then second is, adjusted for inflation, actually are allotting less. So if you adjust the allocation for 5%, 5.5% inflation, then the amount is less than what was last year. And the prime example of that is the allotment to the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. The allotment to the Rural Guarantee Scheme last year was 86,000 crores, and it's 86,000 crores this year also. So therefore, in real terms, it is actually 5.5% less if you deflate it by inflation. Similarly, development of Northeast, there again you find that actually if you inflation adjust it, they're getting less than what they got last year. So that's another technique. Then what you do is you allot funds, but you don't spend the funds. The example of which Professor Kundu gave, and I gave a little bit of example of that. But more importantly, the health sector, which is very crucial and which we saw during the pandemic, the situation that we are in regarding the health infrastructure, it needs to be boosted, but exactly that's happening, that the funds are allotted, but only partially spent. So they're not fully spent, and that's going to create a problem. So the increase in the budget, which is happening is where? Because there's some increase in the budget, it's all going to the organized sector. Which are these sectors? IT sector, PLI scheme, and things like that. So organized sector is getting more, but the unorganized sector is not getting more in real terms. So that is where I think the political economy of the country is very important, that the organized sector is able to get things. Now, why am I saying? Because I've looked at various other major schemes, outlays on other major schemes. And you find all these three things are happening for the big schemes like the PMAY Rural, Post-Matric Scholarship for Scheduled Caste, Pradhan Mantri Anusuchit Jati Abhavad Yojana, Program for Development of Scheduled Tribes, Mission Shakti, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana. These are all schemes of the marginalized sections where one of those 3 things that I mentioned earlier, that's applicable. And there are many more. These are only a select list. So I've counted at least 20 of them. So in my leaflet article, which came out 2 days back, I've given a more detailed list of where these kind of things are happening, where the programs of the unorganized sector, those are not being funded more in real terms. This is on top of the fact that there is a substantial cut of 35,000 crores in food and fertilizer subsidy. So food and fertilizer subsidy is also supposed to be targeted at the poor and the farmers. Those are also being cut. So these other cuts are in addition to this cut in the subsidy bill that is taking place in the food and fertilizer. Now, next slide, please. The deficit is being controlled. And that's why, it is being said by many people that this budget is very good because it's keeping the deficit under control. That is a glide path. We have to go to the glide path for the FRBM, 3% target. And therefore, we are going in that direction. So the fiscal deficit was expected to be 5.9% in 23-24, was brought down to 5.6%. And in 24-25, it will be brought down further to 4.9%. And the subsequent year brought down to 4.5%. So this is called the glide path, that actually the fiscal deficit is being controlled properly. Okay, so government is giving to the various segments and controlling the fiscal deficit. Okay, so therefore it's praised for that. But the point is that one of the key features of this 24-25 decline is the 2.1 lakh crore that's coming from RBI. The surplus of the RBI being transferred is a record high of 2.1 lakh crore. 5 years back, 1.7 lakh crores was transferred. Last year, about 75,000 crores was transferred. This time, 2.1 lakh crores. Now, I characterize this as pure deficit financing, something that the government of India had stopped doing after 1997. This is pure deficit financing. And mind you, RBI is not like a normal company. A normal company earns a profit and it saves that money, and therefore it's called the surplus or the reserve of the company. And from the reserve, it can distribute to the shareholders. RBI is not a normal company. It's a monetary authority. Therefore, when the RBI does something like this, it has monetary implications. It has implications for the interest rates. It has implications for the money supply in the economy. So it's not the usual kind of thing. But anyway, be that as it may, the point is that the government has refused to raise direct taxes. If it had raised more direct taxes, then it could have maintained the lower deficit and also increased expenditures. It's not increasing expenditures and cutting deficit, which means the schemes of the unorganized sector have to be then curtailed. That's the reason why this is happening. So what kind of resource raising should there be? Resource raising in this budget is a decrease of 7,000 crores. Okay, 37,000 crores is being given off, 30,000 crores being raised, net 7,000 crores. So how much is that? 0.18% of the total revenue raised, which is negligible. So you can say that more or less there's neither any extra fund being raised nor any extra fund being given away. It's more or less cancelling each other out. The income tax is being tweaked a little bit through the standard deduction and one or two changes, like shifting from the old scheme to the new scheme where the tax rates are different. So these are some of the changes that are being brought about. But who benefits from this? The benefit goes to the well-off sections. We keep saying middle class, we'll give concession to middle class. But let me say bulk of the middle class is outside the income tax net. Because now you pay taxes at 7 lakh rupees of income. Below that, you don't have to pay any tax. There are various provisions up to 5 lakh and then 5 lakh to 7 lakh. There are other provisions. So you don't have to pay any tax, which means up to about 60,000 rupees of income per month, you don't have to pay a tax. Okay. Now, what percentage of people are there in the middle class? 9 crore individuals file tax returns. Okay. Out of which, as the Prime Minister says, 1.5 crore are effective taxpayers. The rest are not effective taxpayers. That means only 1.5 crore out of 140 crore are paying effective taxes. So that's 1.1% of the population. Okay. This is not middle class. This is upper middle class. It's the rich sections who belong to that 15 million, 1.5 crore. Okay. Now, out of the 9 crore, about 5 crore file nil return. That means they don't have a taxable income. Okay. And about 2.5 crore are in between the 1.5 crore and this, which you can call the middle class. So the middle class is only about 2 crore in the taxpayer bracket. So who's going to be the real beneficiary? Not this middle class, it's the well-off segments, the 1.5 crore people. So in other words, middle classes are marginal direct taxpayers, but substantial indirect taxpayers. Everything that you buy, the shirt that you buy, the watch that you buy, the shoes that you buy, everything has an indirect tax. So a middle class family may pay 25% or so of indirect tax, but only 5% as direct tax. So if you want to reduce the burden of taxation on the middle class, you must reduce the indirect taxes. Direct taxes, which are paid by the well-off segments, actually the well-off segments are shooting from the shoulder of the middle class, saying reduce direct taxes because they will benefit out of it. The indirect taxes are the ones that should be reduced. And how do you do that? You have to raise direct taxes from the well-off segments. Then only can you reduce the indirect taxes, otherwise your fiscal deficit will shoot up. Okay, or expenditures will have to be curtailed. So the middle classes are affected by inflation, by unemployment, and by the indirect taxes. Okay, indirect taxes are inflationary. So the link between indirect taxes and inflation is very straightforward. Okay, so what we need to do is look at that and also generate jobs, because large number of middle class families, the children are not getting proper job. There's a huge backlog of work that and educated and unemployed is the very large number. According to the ILO report, 83% of the unemployed are educated young people. So educated youth is unemployed. They need more employment, and that's where we need to focus. Now, another big change is the capital gains taxation, the long-term capital gains taxation. Now, why is there a long-term capital gains taxation? The distinction is between short-term capital gain and long-term. Short-term capital gain comes out of speculative activity. You are speculating on the rise of the asset. Long-term capital gain is because you're an investor, and with inflation, the price of the asset is going up. Now, if you generate in the short-term capital gain, say like in the share market, you generate 20-25% return, why would you invest your money into real assets? You would not set up a factory, because if you set up a factory, it'll take you 2 to 3 years to set it up, and then the profit will come in the 4th or 5th year. But by investing in the stock market, you can make a return of 20% in 6 months. So therefore, this kind of speculative activity takes you away from the real investment in the economy. It slows down the investment rate in the economy and is not good for it. So that's why it's important. But the problem that has been created is we call 1 year as the time period for long term. If you hold the asset for more than 1 year, it becomes long term. Earlier, it used to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years, and you had different tax slabs. Okay. But post 1991, you reduced that, and now you have this problem. So I think what we needed was a change of definition of long-term capital gains, but not the removal of the indexation of the cost. Indexation of the cost only brings the cost up to what the current cost is. So indexation should have been there, but the definition should have been changed. And this move will therefore actually benefit the organized sector further, because the organized sector will actually get more investment rather than the speculative investment. Now, the next is that the budget shows a change in strategy. The international finance agencies basically are interested in limiting the role of government in an economy. That's called the strategic retreat of the state. So they want the strategic retreat of the state so that the private sector can advance. So the whole focus of IMF, World Bank, WTO policies is to push the private sector in. And for that, you limit the activity of the state. So you reduce taxes and then force a fiscal deficit target. So therefore, the size of the government reduces. And you can see that happening globally, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, the East European bloc did not have capital. So what did they start doing? They started lowering the taxes. This is called the race to the bottom. When they lowered the tax rate, capital started going to them. So look at Ireland. Ireland used to be one of the poorest European countries 40 years back, is now the richest, because the big companies like Starbucks and so on are all headquartered in Ireland because the tax rate is so low. Google and so on, they're all headquartered there. So this race to the bottom has meant the tax rates have been coming down all over the world. So therefore, international finance capital limits the size of the government by saying the fiscal deficit target should be 3%, it should not be high, and reduction in direct taxes. These two together limit the size of the government and the intervention of the government. But the point is, a government that claims Atmanirbharta and Vishwaguru, if it follows an international finance agency's agenda, then how is it Atmanirbhar? Or how is it a Vishwaguru? We should have our own policies, and our own policies are required to actually take care of our requirements. The other change that's coming is vis-a-vis the Chinese imports. If you look at the Chinese situation, what we find is that we are unable to reduce imports from China. And we are importing not only high technology items, but we are also importing low technology items like Ganesh Murti and Latai and Manja and the Diwali lights and things like that. So we import electronic items, we import, automobile components and so on, but also these low technology, because they have managed to produce on scale. Supply chains are very good. Their marketing is very good. They do market research here in India, what kind of Pichkari will sell, what kind of Diwali lights will sell, etc. They know the market very well. So they have managed to do that. So we are finally saying that we should allow investment to come in from China. Whereas till recently, because of Doklam and others, we were saying we should restrict investment from China, because Chinese investment in the startup sector was coming in very big way. Many companies in India, the startups are actually funded by the Chinese companies. Okay. So we had started restricting that, saying that they are an enemy country and we should not get so much. But we could not stop their imports. We stopped their visa. We tried to stop giving visa to their engineers. And Indian industry was complaining that without those engineers, we are not able to operate those machines because those are very specialized machines. So this tussle has been going on. So we are finally now saying we probably will have to allow investments to take place. So we have a $80 billion deficit vis-a-vis China. We get an import of about $101 billion. We export about $17-18 billion, and we have a deficit of about $81 billion. That means China gets an advantage of $81 billion from us. So the point is, can we become a Vishwaguru when our unorganized sector, which employs 94% of the workforce, can it be in decline, and can we become a Vishwaguru? Because to become Vishwaguru by 1947, from the current position to reach $14,000 per capita, and our population will also increase to about 1.6 billion people by then, we need an 11% rate of growth between now and 1947. We cannot get 11% growth. We averaged 6.5% over the last 10 years. So to get 11% growth is going to be a problem. And why is this happening? Because we are following a suboptimal macroeconomic policy. What is the suboptimal macroeconomic policy that we are following? Our economy consists of the organized and the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector is 94% of the workforce, organized sector is 6% of the workforce. And what's happened is, since demonetization, demand is shifting from the unorganized to the organized sector. So the unorganized sector is in decline. The organized sector is the one that is increasing. And the government has favored the organized sector. So whether it be GST, whether it be digitization, whether it be other such measures that the government has taken, the big conglomerates, Adani, Ambani, Tatas, they're being allowed to acquire assets. So this is a strategy of the Korean chaeballs. So Samsung, Hyundai, Daewoo, of course, is closed, but LG, and so on. They are big conglomerates. But those conglomerates have advanced on the basis of technological development, and they've gone global. Our conglomerates have expanded on the basis of acquisition of assets. So Adani has acquired airports, ports, cement, whatever have you. Whatever is profitable, they acquire it. Okay. As a result, the investment climate has declined in the country. And that's why large number of the ultra high net worth individuals are leaving the country, because they feel threatened that they could also be taken over. So the data says that between 2014 and 2019, 23,000 high net worth individuals left India. In 2019, another 7,000 left India. In 2022, another 7,000 left India. So this decline, this cronyism, is leading to a decline in the investment climate, because you're not sure whether you could also be acquired. There are any number of examples. I mean, even amongst the Adani and the Birlas, you can see Ultratech is the largest cement manufacturing company in the country. It wanted to acquire these two companies. And this French company was selling these two companies. The agreement was made. The next day, the agreement was broken, and these two companies went to Adani Cement. So even Birla could not prevent that from happening. Okay. So these conglomerates that are there, the point I'm trying to make is that the government has helped these conglomerates and the organized sector in every possible way, and demand is shifted. So you have, say, for instance, in the trade sector, demand is shifted from the neighborhood store to the e-commerce. E-commerce is growing at 20-30%. When the economy is growing at only 6.5%, it means the demand is shifting from others to there. And you have report from textile sector, leather goods sector, pressure cooker sector, luggage sector, and so on, saying demand is shifting. So in other words, the unorganized sector is declining. So if 94%, which is working in the unorganized sector, is declining, obviously all the macro problems will come, because 94%, if that's declining, unemployment will be greater. If unemployment there is there and the incomes are stagnant or declining, then inequality will rise. And when inequality rises, demand problem will come. So all the macroeconomic problems that we face are coming from the fact that the unorganized sector is declining, the organized sector is rising. This also suggests that the rate of growth of the economy is not 7%, it's more like 1.5%. Because that 7% is the rate of growth of the organized sector. the data, the quarterly data that comes, the quarterly data is based entirely on the organized sector except for agriculture. But now doubts have been raised even about the agriculture sector's growth rate, because last year we said we had a record crop of paddy and wheat, okay, and yet the paddy and wheat prices rose. So we banned the exports of paddy and wheat, and yet the prices rose. What it meant was that the output was not what the government was claiming it to be. So even the agriculture data is not correct. The organized sector data, the quarterly data for the organized sector, for the corporate sector, is based on only 300 companies' results, not the 6,000 companies, because it's the balance sheet that are declared, it's based on that. So therefore, my argument is that actually what's happening is that the organized sector is growing, but the unorganized sector is decreasing, and all your macroeconomic problems are based on that. So the government needed to change policy to help the unorganized sector, to help the poor segments. That would have boosted demand. The demand problem that is faced by the economy, and mind you, demand problem is not today. You look at the 2017-18 quarter four, the rate of growth was 8% officially. And that declined in 2019-20 quarter four to 3.1%. So the rate of growth had plummeted from 8% to 3.1% because demand was short. Inequality leads to demand problem. Okay. So therefore, these signals have been there. So in other words, what we needed to do was to apply these correctives in the 2024-25 budget. Otherwise, the problems will continue to grow. And therefore, let me conclude. I think I've already taken more time than I should have. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the adverse election results should have led to a change of strategy. Look at the unemployment problem in agriculture specifically, because agriculturists have been complaining of a shortage of income. Government did not raise overall expenditures substantially because the government did not want to tax the organized sector and the well-off sections, and it did not want to exceed the fiscal deficit target. So it had to curtail the expenditures, keep them below. And more important for government than economy, the fiscal crisis or the fiscal problem dictated by the international finance corporations, that becomes more important than the problems that are faced here. So this makes, difficult for India to say we are either self-sufficient or a Vishwaguru. The many macroeconomic issues that need urgent attention, they needed to be looked at. The fiscal deficit reduction is not what is needed at the moment when demand is short, because fiscal deficit does boost the demand a little bit. And the ruling party, therefore, continues with suboptimal budgetary macro policies. Thank you very much for your patience.